I believe that we are still on page 44, 45, talking about land use or public and semi-public zones. So has anybody noticed anything else that they would like to bring up or talk about?
Well, when we get into development standards,
Yeah, that's it. We
Yeah.
left off with development standards.
Well, we talked about these, but we didn't ever just say, okay, we don't have any more comments.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of got hung up on
We got distracted.
resort and retreat centers and event centers and,
Yeah, nothing
So-
else is really screaming to me.
Okay.
So,
that's good.
so yes, let's talk
Do
about.
we want to finish, I mean, do we want to talk about event centers more at this point, or do we want to wait until the Board of Supervisors takes it up?
Well, I think we'll talk about events more, but at this, I don't think we want to talk about the details of special
Okay.
events at this point. But we do want to talk about how they fit into these, you know, if you have any comments on how they fit into public service rec or open space.
Okay, with regard to that, the comment I would have is that sometimes it's effective to have a use permit rather than allowing something by permit as a by right use. Because once it's a by right use, if you have a problem situation, then you have to go through a whole process to try and revoke the use or revoke the, to stop the nuisance, which is difficult. A use permit, on the other hand, can have a term of years associated with it. So sometimes it's nice if you have a situation where you're not sure it's going to work, say, hey, look, you're going to get a use permit for 3 years. If you and your neighbors work this out in those 3 years, great. But if your neighbors are still as mad as they are now at you, you might not get renewed, But non-renewal is a lot easier than trying to, shut down a nuisance.
So, Tom, are you speaking specifically about a specific use? Or
Well,
is that just a general,
I think he's talking in general.
just general
Like,
statement?
right now,
Well,
we have a special
but
event
as-
permit
yeah.
process.
If you have an event center type situation, wedding centers, stuff like that, that sometimes, that are showing up controversial, that sometimes a use permit is a useful thing to have. It makes it easier if there are problems down the road.
Right, so
And at the
event
end of the
centers are
3 years-
currently located in the rec zone as a conditional use.
So I think
Right.
what Tom is saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, is that even if the event center is a permitted use, the events themselves might want to have some
Within
kind
the event center?
No, actually. I
Oh,
was
you're talking
the-
about
The
separately?
center itself, no, I was talking about the center itself.
Oh, okay.
Whether it's in and this, I wasn't just speaking just to the rec zone, but to the where you put it in general. And when we get to discussing the details, problems in, where you have event centers in rural residential areas, if the size of the event is too large for the, so noisy it upsets the neighbors, you're going to have problems with. So in those sorts of situations, a use permit is a much, much better approach from my perspective than a permitted use. Just a
It
thought.
has a conditional use permit on it right now.
Yeah.
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 But I think Tom's just talking about in general.
Well, he just told me, no, that's not.
It
Oh,
was-
you don't, I don't understand, okay.
So.
No, I mean-
We'll talk more about
Yeah, we
special,
will.
the
When we
events
get there.
themselves and that
No,
kind of
we-
permitting in a whole separate discussion.
Yeah, but if we're
I think
talking
he's
about
basically
events,
just saying he agrees with what's proposed, right?
Right.
Right.
well, I don't know about under the PS zone. Should they be permitted with a administrative use permit?
Well,
An event center?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I just want to make sure we're still talking about the same thing.
Anyhow, I'm happy with the way things
Yeah.
are, I think because of the kinds of things we're talking about. Like, I think we're okay,
Okay.
yeah.
And then
So
special
let's-
events we're putting off until later.
Yes.
Because it's a big discussion.
Yeah, but I mean, but I knew we were putting off major changes until after this process.
Well,
But you're
right.
talking about a major discussion as a part of.
I'm talking about, talk about the way the tables are set up and whether or not special events are allowed in particular zones is fine right now. But the details of special events and their permitting, I think we should hold off on because I think it's gonna become a bigger.
Yeah, we'll hold off
Bigger
until
topic.
after we're done with this.
Exactly,
That's
because
what-
it's gonna
So-
apply in other areas of the,
Yeah. Okay,
so, yeah. But we do need to talk about floor area ratios.
Oh, goody.
Ours.
We do. Tim's gonna lead us in a discussion.
yes, take it.
It's
Volunteers.
0.25 of what, maximum? So your well or septic has to be 25% of the maximum floor ratio? Is that how that, what is that,
What are we
Michelle?
talking about?
Max,
This is a weird, I see what they're trying to get at
Yeah.
here.
45.
okay, 45, yeah. So I think
That I can answer.
it's odd because we're talking here in the rec zoning about how much space the sewer and water can take up, and that seems like an odd thing to limit. When
The oth-
it's really the use that
the other way
the
around.
water is associated with that you would be concerned about, right?
That's what they're saying.
Yes, I
They're
see,
saying-
that's what they're saying. So I'm not quite sure what we're
What do
trying
you see, Tom,
to
is what they're saying?
achieve.
What they're saying is, let's say you have a bowling alley on an acre, right?
Yeah.
And the bowling alley's on an individual well, then the bowling alley can be a quarter of an acre. If the bowling alley's on a public water system, it could be a half an acre.
Right, I think that's what they're trying to say. It's with or without public or individual.
Exactly.
But this is, any of the uses we've been talking about are limited by these?
Yes.
Yes. So if you're on the
Yeah.
rec zone, you're not gonna take up more than half of your land area with whatever
Whatever the use is.
the use is.
And why is, by saying none applicable under PS, that means there's no limitation?
No, there's
Or
not, you can't
It's-
do it. You
Can't
can't
do it.
develop anything that requires it.
Can't have either
No,
a well or public sewer?
No, it's
No, no,
not
no,
the
no.
well, or it's the use associated with them. I think that's just what's not super clear.
Yeah. Well, I think it's awkward for us because we don't, this is all new to our code. I mean,
Right.
we've never referred
But,
to.
Gina, what do you understand none applicable as meaning under those,
What,
both, either, well, both the sewage?
I agree with Michelle in that the open space zone doesn't allow the
No,
development
I'm
that
looking more
would
at the
be allowed to occur.
PS zone.
Right, and that's,
I mean,
are we
that's,
saying you can have any size you want on a public service parcel?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, which is just the opposite of what we're saying is
Yeah.
under the open space, so.
We just feel that this needs.
It is awkward, and I had to ask multiple times and I still can't wrap my brain around it. Maybe it's just
okay, well,
too.
then it's unfair for us to
Yeah. I
grill you.
Oh, yeah,
need to
we
revisit
can,
this.
I will, and I think this is pretty standard stuff. But yeah, it was a little difficult for me to understand.
I think the
But I
idea
think-
is that, yeah.
I think
the
you're
idea-
correct, Tom, in that, but I'm not exactly sure why we've referred to PS and open space as,
Well, the non-applicable means there is no limitation.
right.
So if you're dealing a public building, we're not regulating the government essentially.
Right.
Yeah, if
And
the government's got a
under
well,
open
the
space,
government
you
can do it at
can't
will.
at all.
And I suppose it doesn't really apply to open space because we don't allow those uses anyway.
Exactly.
So,
Right.
so I mean, if you're talking about a trail or, you know, something like that, that's,
But you could have
Drinking.
public toilets available, although in open space, you're not supposed to have any development, but, you know, if you have a long trail system, you could want public toilets available.
Yeah.
Or, but maybe they would all be, you know, like Park Service toilets,
I just picked,
self-contained.
I just picked up another issue. So under transportation, communication, and utility uses, we allow telecommunication and facilities within buildings. By telecommunication, I'm thinking we're talking about telecommunication facilities with
Yeah,
cell
you're
towers. That would be on page 44. Now, if you go to page 45, we've now put a maximum building height limit, but are we also limiting the height of telecommunication facilities, or is this new TBD height and height exception
Right.
something that
so,
would
yeah.
account
So
for,
there's additional regulations for telecommunication facilities.
which is not yet being identified?
Well, it's identified in here, we just don't have a chapter.
Okay.
So if you go to the standards under specific uses, you'll find it
Yeah.
there.
It's 80 feet.
But why are communication facilities within buildings not allowed in the rec zone? Because you could have a building in the rec zone.
I don't see where we've got to the communications
It's
facility.
right here,
44,
34.
44.
We're jumping back.
44.
44.
On
It's allowed by permit.
So, yeah, so it should be permitted within a building in the rec zone, should be able to have communication facilities.
Because they could be attached to buildings as well.
It says
Well,
within.
within.
We're talking inside,
Oh,
it's not,
wow.
sorry.
But, I mean, communications, I haven't looked up the definition. Communications facilities and telecommunications are,
Well, I'm not looking at telecommunication, I'm looking at the within a building.
Okay.
Since within the rec zone, you can have recreation themed buildings. It seems like they should certainly be able to have their own communication
Sure.
facilities.
yeah.
So if you're
No,
looking
we
for
were
the,
Completely cut off.
if you're looking for the additional regulations regarding telecommunication facilities, it's on page 81.
Yeah.
All the way to the bottom is the beginning.
Okay, so again, under height requirements, it says the maximum height of telecommunication facilities shall be that of the zoning district in which the facility is located, except as provided as follows. So we are somehow tying the height of the facility to the height allowed in the zone, which means in the rec zone, it would be 35 feet, in the OS zone, it would be 24 feet, with exceptions, which talk about building mounted or facilities mounted on structures. The facilities that we currently have in the county are or the requests that I've seen so far are 90 feet, 105 feet, 115 feet. These things are getting taller by the minute. So it might be a little short-sighted for us to put a restriction on these things, especially with all the regulations about FCC and the Telecommunications Act and other subsequent acts that have really kind of made, government regulation a little restricted. It's still possible, but I think we need to take a very clear look at that to make sure we're not tying our hands by saying, well, you can only have a 35-foot antenna in the RX zone and the OS zone plus 15 feet. Well, that's only 50 feet. That's not going to cut it.
So isn't it 15 feet above the existing height of a legally established building? So it would be in a rec, it would be,
35 plus 15,
yeah.
The
50
question
feet.
is whether you allow just a telecommunications tower,
Yeah, and
Like
a
a-
50-foot tower is not
like a
going
cell
to,
phone tower.
it's not
would
going
be
to,
90 feet.
it could be 100, I've seen 115
Yeah,
existing. So we either need to do something about the height of the structures, or not put a limit. Let the AUP or CUP process decide what the height should be.
And why would we be allowing telecommunication facilities within open space?
Well, it's on page 44 under telecommunication. Yeah.
I know, I mean, the question is why?
Well, because that would be one of the places where you will probably most.
You have the space.
cleared.
Yeah,
And a
exactly.
clear view of
It's
the
wide,
southern
it's open.
sky.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's
And it's away from,
Yeah,
away from other,
it's
you
away
know,
because it's open space.
structures and people and,
Right.
I mean, because it's one of the main concerns that we always get whenever we have an application is, this thing is too close to my house. I don't want to see it. I don't want it near me. So anytime they're proposed to be located near residential structures, people start, getting really concerned, and that's
Right.
when things start going
But
south.
up till now, we've been kind of preserving this concept of open space.
Right.
You're not gonna run into a metal tower that's 75 feet tall.
Well, in the big picture of things, though, how obtrusive would a 75-foot faux palm or faux oak tree look in a sea of hundreds of acres of open space?
They look awful.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Tim.
The antenna that's on top of Big Hill and Sheep
Yeah.
Ranch
Yes,
is, as Peter Maurer called it, a bottle brush.
right,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. I mean, that's a really odd-looking one. They're trying to make a pine tree, and they're the ugliest
All
one
the
I've ever
branches are
seen.
exactly the same.
I remember
Yeah.
you asking Commissioner Lash that I think AT&T to change its design so that it tapered, which
Yeah.
I don't know how much
But-
AT&T took that into.
Now, one thing that has come to my attention
To
also,
consider the species we have here.
when it comes to location of these facilities, has to do with zones in which service is needed, and also the availability of utilities, electricity for one, that would tap into them. So,
It just seems to me, I mean, Gina, there's not gonna be a whole lot of property zoned open space, correct? And if
I
we
would
have this-
presume not. I mean, because that's pretty extreme. I mean, if you're willing to, apply an open space zone, I mean, there's some pretty, compelling reasons why. I don't think anyone's gonna voluntarily just say, oh, yes, I want you to apply open space, unless, of course, you've entered into like a conservation easement or something, but
Yeah.
again, I mean, I suppose if you've gone that far, then maybe it would be up to the landowner to say, well, I don't want this kind of a use on my property.
I'm thinking of the users
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
there wandering in lovely nature.
I mean, yeah,
Well, and I mean, and you have to consider that they will be having to maintenance the tower.
yeah. I mean,
you know.
regardless of where we have them, my issue is when we tie the height of a telecommunications facility to the height allowed in a zone, it is overly restrictive because we don't have any zone that allows for a 50-foot structure to begin with.
Yeah.
So if we're doing 35, 40 feet, what we're saying is we can add 15 feet to that, and then your facility has to be 55 feet tall in any zone. That is overly restrictive.
So I think we have two issues here. One is on page 44, it's where do we want, which zones do we want to allow these and what kind of and do they need a permit? Are they permitted by right? So,
We've identified,
so first we have facilities within buildings. So let's take care of that one, the easy one.
Okay.
None in open space because there's no buildings.
Right.
But it seems like permitted in wherever you have a building, right? Inside the building. Now, then we have
So we're in agreement that in the rec zone,
now we might have a building in a rec zone as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm
we,
saying.
that we're gonna allow, that's
We would
permitted.
allow it,
That's
We would
permitted.
allow it because it has to be within the building.
yeah. So, but then we look and we say, okay, in public service and rec, it says A/C. What is the A/C?
Yeah, without any-
It's either an AUP or a CUP.
Well,
Well,
either.
we know what it means, but are you asking us which we think it should
Usually
be?
that sort of notation has the footnote number. after
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
currently we do them as AUPs.
Right,
So we may want to do them
Oh.
as CUPs because of well, we're currently looking at one right now that may become a subject of a planning commission appeal. And the concern would be by doing it as an AUP, we're not getting a quote-unquote public hearing through the process of approval. It could come after approval, but we're not getting them before approval. And we've got a bunch of letters that people that are waiting to come before the planning commission and vent their frustration. However, under the current AUP process, it's the planning director's decision, which is appealable within 15 days to the planning commission, which decision will be posted on the website, as we discussed yesterday. So the question is, do we want to continue to do them as AUPs? Or do we want to start doing them as CUPs to allow this kind of robust public discussion whereby, members of the public, we still do the same notification process.
It's a classic, not in my backyard sort of situation.
Absolutely, yeah,
And it's one that many people feel very strongly about.
absolutely.
And so, since they're probably, a majority of them would end up being appealed from any granting of the AUP, I'd say, we ought to just say, have a CUP for PS and REC and not permitted
Yeah,
in OS.
I agree. I mean, I think, when you look at open spaces and what comes to mind are wetlands and, if it's part of a development, a subdivision development, I want a tower in the middle of that. I mean, so I agree with you.
So what it's gonna be not allowed in.
Now allowed in OS, CUP in the two other categories for telecommunications.
unless Gina or Martha can explain to us what the question was there. If there was a decision for us, or if we're just missing a footnote of some kind.
Yeah.
And I guess, if it is such a hot button topic, have we developed a set of questions or requirements from the telecommunication company about why they picked that particular location?
Yes.
And
Yes.
And,
I think
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I touched on that earlier in my conversation. The first criteria is they have an area that's been identified as needing service, which means, so once they put a big ring around that, the next step is to figure out which properties have utilities. that they can tie into. And most of those sites end up being adjacent to residential because residential has those types of utilities. And that is those are the two major points that they consider. Now, what makes it even more difficult and challenging for government agencies are all the federal regulations regarding these types of facilities. We cannot deny them, based on radio frequency radiation or any other spurious relationship. We can regulate the height, we can regulate the aesthetics. So when we're dealing with these things, we have to be very, very precise because if we deny them, the telecommunications facility would appeal or sue. If we approve them, the residential people who don't want to look at a fake-looking monopine can do the same. So, but they have to bring other issues more than just, I don't like looking at this thing. Now they're talking about depreciation of property value. So either side, we have to be really careful as we go forward.
And it's further filtered by, so you identify this region that needs better coverage. You look and you find 3 parcels that could potentially support a tower, and they write a letter to those 3 parcels, but only one of those people is willing to contemplate it. And that isn't always the best site for it, but it's the only people who are willing to enter into an agreement with them. And then just because the property owner wants it, the neighbors don't necessarily want it.
And the telecommunications company will invest considerable money to get the electricity to the tower. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
my one experience, again, Sheep
Yes,
Ranch,
they will.
it's a quarter of a mile at least
Right.
up the road.
Yeah.
So ultimately, if we do not grant the conditional use permit, it could end up in court and the telecommunication company could win
Well-
and enforce that issue?
Well,
Depending on the reason.
depending on the reason.
There's been vigorous amount of litigation. It's continuing. There's been stricter, it's been harder. There's more federal preemption now than there was 5 years ago when it comes to denying telecommunications. So federal government believes it's a priority to expand our coverage. There's been lots of litigation about the extent to which local control applies when it comes especially to aesthetic regulations. And so there's also some vague language in some of the federal orders that come on. We always get these assertions by telecommunications applicants that they're an eligible facilities request, and if they fit that definition, there's less we can do about it. I've read through it and don't always agree, but we try to work these things out without having to go to court on the front end of the application stage. But it's basically, it's an area where if 2 people feel strongly enough, you could make a lot of arguments pro and con, and we would be stuck in the middle, and our approval could be fought either way. I will say that for aesthetic standards, and I know that we're fixing this here, they're supposed to be, they don't have to be in an ordinance necessarily, but aesthetic standards cannot be arbitrary. There really needs to be sort of articulated more objective concepts of what types of aesthetic standards apply. So
I think the second piece of this whole thing, so we've taken care of this part, the table, but the actual specific standards in the telecommunications facilities section, I think we should deal with when we get to that section, because it's going to apply in more places than this. And so we don't need to talk about it each time. We'll have to talk about what is a reasonable height, when it needs to be attached to a building, when it needs to be in, all of those things. And they have that all well started here, so we just need to go through it. So I think we can wait until we get to it.
Public comment?
Yeah.
Sure.
I just want to remind people that Land Use Implementation 5A discusses a telecommunication ordinance and is included as a mitigation measure in the general plan, draft DIR, and findings of fact. And one of the criteria there was that if it is an environmentally sensitive area, consider looking at other alternative locations. So what the commissioner mentioned, that if it's in a wetland or something, we probably don't want it there. He's absolutely right.
Right. But that's kind of would be a given with the.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
measure is that,
Yeah.
Tom?
LU-5A, Telecommunications Ordinance.
Okay.
It's a mitigation measure in the draft EIR on page 2-6, in the final EIR on page 3-9, and in the findings of fact that are found in the board packet from 11/12/19 on page 149.
Okay.
And that's all on the chart I gave you guys a couple
Yeah.
days ago.
I got it. I included that as my own version in the.
And in reality, the process of approving one of these sites begins with a cultural bioanalysis of the property itself. And that's how these communication facilities, that's how they introduce themselves to the county. And they ask us, is this property in a sensitive area of cultural resources, archaeobio, and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we begin. So, yeah, and if we tell them, yes, there's artifacts or burial ground or endangered species, then, it escalates what they need to do from that particular point.
Burying house thirds. Anyway,
Watch out, everybody, we're gonna get back to page 45.
we might get back to page 45, and I think we see what they're trying to do here. The question is, should it be the same ratio, no matter what the use is, no matter what the use?
Oh, goodness.
I'm just bringing it up for, I don't think we have to answer it today. I don't think we want to do anything more with this today. But I think it's something we should be thinking about.
Right. Most zoning codes apply this, a ratio that is specific to the zone rather than a ratio that's specific to the use itself. So regardless of what you want to build, what I'm thinking we need to do really is to take a realistic look at our building height limits. I don't know what the height of the courthouse is. I don't know what the height of the police facilities, what the height of those structures, what the heights are. But if we're having a height limit of 35 feet and we have existing structures in the same set zone that is 50 or 55 feet or 45 feet, then I think we're taking a regressive step. So if we, not unless there is a really significant reason why we want low profile structures. I'm looking at the rec zone of 35 and the OS zone of 24.
I'm wondering why we even have a height limit in
In the rec
the
zone?
in the open space
space.
zone where you're not allowed to build anything.
Yeah.
That's true.
So that might have been because we were going to allow some telecommunication equipment, but if we're not going to allow it, perhaps it could just go away.
But getting back to the non-applicable in the,
Which NA?
in the PS, for building height. You mean, obviously there can be buildings in there, and obviously there should be some maximum building height if we have maximum building height somewhere else. I don't understand the non-applicable.
Well, maybe it's addressing the fact that we don't want to restrict the height of buildings in PS zones.
Well,
Like a government center, for example,
That's what they're saying.
we may want to have a
The
5-story
government
building.
do whatever they want.
Right.
Yeah, we might want to have a 5-story building or
But if we're
10-story
talking about
building
open
if you can afford
space,
it.
public safety facilities are conditional use in
I
the
don't-
open space.
Actually think,
Or
I
did
think
we?
it's okay that we're not trying to tell the public services zone, because that could be something like a fire station, and there could be a requirement for them to have a tall tower for training purposes.
Yeah.
And so to me, this sort of makes sense, because you're gonna look at it each individually. The rec zone, I think it makes sense to determine something. The open space, I just don't think we need a height, because.
Even
Public
though we
comment?
have public,
comment? Yeah.
Let Gina
Facilities?
finish answering, and then
So-
we'll see what you can add to it.
we've got, public safety facilities as a conditional use.
Right.
So I mean, in the open space, so that could be a building,
Exactly.
right? So,
So, but we're just not saying what it is, so we don't know.
In the OS zone.
Well, I'm talking the OS zone.
right, that's what I'm saying.
There is a-
Are you saying that you don't think we need to have, oh, you're just saying that we don't need to restrict the height, that it can be whatever?
In the OS zone, it can't be a building. It can't
Well,
be-
that's
Yes,
what
there
I'm
can.
telling you.
Yes, there can.
Is if we scroll back up, we're allowing public facilities, public safety facilities as a conditional use in the OS
In
zone.
OS.
And we are permitting accessory uses, activities, and structures.
Yeah,
Except that we've already said we're not. It's, it can't, well, maybe not. We're only
Well,
talking about
I'm-
certain things within that. You're right.
yeah,
I
so
thought it was
did we go?
only our passive recreation that's allowed in there. Public safety facilities.
Public safety facilities.
You're right. That is the one. I wonder what public,
Well, let's go and look.
I can see.
And I will say, as far as accessory uses to passive recreation, if any of you have ever hiked up to Half Dome, you will note that there is a at least 20-foot Clevis Multrum outhouse on the way along the passive path. So, yeah, height
And that's what
restrictions,
I
yeah,
just was talking about earlier, the outhouses, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
so that's
24
fine.
Okay, so we keep going.
That does have a reason to be.
There. Okay,
So are we all,
I think we're
are we
done.
moving past that
for the-
now?
For the time being and now. Setbacks, dude. These are- seem like-
Can we, so I'm a little confused. What is the conclusion about the height limit in the OS zone?
It's 24?
24
Are we
feet.
gonna keep it at
I
24?
thought we weren't gonna, oh, because
Oh, because of the
facilities.
public safety.
Public
Public
safety
safety.
facilities?
Yeah, I don't think 24 is what we want. Can we just say either non-applicable or at least 35 feet, or to be determined?
well, I mean,
What,
we don't want a bunch of clunky buildings in the open space. I mean, this is, public service buildings probably would have something to do with the passive recreation or, ranger station.
it's
or
not public
something.
service, it's public safety.
Public
Public
safety,
safety, I'm sorry.
right.
Yeah, so.
So ranger station, it doesn't, I think 24 is a fine,
Well, let's look at our definition of public safety.
The only thing I could think of was a fire
Fire.
outlook tower.
Right.
Oh,
That would be
fire
a
outlook tower.
separate,
Oh, sure.
yeah.
Facilities providing public safety and emergency services, including police and fire protection
See?
and emergency medical services, ranger stations, lookout towers, and forest stations with incidental storage, training, and maintenance facilities.
Right.
So if you're looking for a lookout tower, 24 feet isn't probably high enough.
but
But it's a conditional use permit,
Right.
so couldn't we have it set by the conditional use permit?
Sure.
That's what I would think we'd wanna do.
okay.
And I suppose if there's a need for additional height on whatever structure, then they can apply for a setback, height variance.
Yeah, so we're gonna put C there, where 24.
Well, I was just gonna say by CUP, because the CUP can tell them
Right.
what their height
Right.
limit is
So
for their
we-
particular use.
Well,
They could
but
make
doesn't that,
It's
what do you mean
currently,
by putting C? And
We
Which
don't
one?
have a C, is,
No.
yeah, yes, yes, not in this application, we haven't been using those, but yes, same thing.
Yeah,
Okay, so we're all good with public safety facilities as a conditional use in the OS zone?
I don't know if we're good. If it's a mandate, I don't know if we have a choice, but.
And I think sometimes it's just necessary.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I think it's more necessary than maybe
And it's gonna be,
mandated.
and I think the conditional use is gonna determine whether or not,
Right, well, at least you have an opportunity to review it and
Right.
analyze environmental impacts, and then you can be looking at things like, sensitive habitat or, other environmentally, sensitive issues.
But should we not have a C with the accessory uses, activities, and structures instead of a permitted by right, since we don't even know what we're talking about here? And what somebody might think is a required accessory structure, other folks might
Sure.
not think. On page 45 of it. Yeah.
either A or C.
Yeah.
I think I might go to A.
So,
Yeah, A would be okay, I think.
Since accessory
open
and
space.
activities both start with A.
Right.
we're
Yeah,
just
I think
talking
it's
about open
perfect.
space, right?
Under, yeah,
Yes. Accessory uses, activities, and structures, and A under OS.
Commissioner Laddish, what do you not want to see in the OS zone?
most things.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I want to
What's
trees, I want to
required?
see grass and flowers, I want to see the sky.
Okay,
Birds, plants,
okay.
Red-legged
Bears.
frogs.
So,
butterflies.
Butterflies.
Yeah. Rainbows. Yes, exactly. That's
That's
where
why-
it's headed.
That's why I was asking about it, I don't think we're talking about a lot of acreage here for
yeah.
OS.
Yeah, well, because I was, my mind keeps going. With the wind and solar energy systems, we're allowing something in a TS and something in a rec zone. But then there's this regulation under SB 100 that requires everybody in the state to basically at least have 60% of all the utility services provided be electric. So most jurisdictions are allowing solar farms and, wind turbines. And I'm not advocating, I'm not.
understand. I'm not jumping yet.
So, wind turbines, but SB 100 is beginning to shape the way we look at where we locate things, because it's all part of this greenhouse gas. Outside of SB 32, we have SB 100 as well. So the reason I asked the question is, if somebody said, okay, I don't want to put wind turbines, but I want to have a sea of solar panels in your OS zone, you would
No.
say,
No,
okay, very good.
no, because,
No.
I mean, once we clear up the air, which
Yeah.
we're doing right now.
Yes,
There needs to be a place where you can go and breathe it and see nature.
Plus, we're doing carbon sequestration in that space.
That is
right? It's already
Right.
being used.
plant trees. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And I just want to remind people what Gina has told us is that this is private open space within subdivisions.
Right.
Right.
This is not ag or resource lands, right? And you're going to get a lot more pushback if you're putting solar or wind in some private open space in someone's backyard of some subdivision than you are if you're going to put it, in ag or resource land.
Yeah.
I envision the open space zone is likely to be applied to parcels with conservation easements,
But that's not what,
environmentally sensitive, land. So, I mean, if you're looking at the preservation of natural resources, then you absolutely need to be restrictive as to what is going to impact the land.
So, okay, now I'm confused. I thought this was only for that rec, that
No,
rec
it's
E
no,
pre-
those are the zones that we're gonna actually rezone. So, this zone is a new zone that can be applied to other parcels. So if you have, say, you've entered into a conservation easement, with the US, Fish and Wildlife Service for, some critical habitat, then you could apply, an OS, overlay to your or zone to your parcel, which kind of reinforces that conservation easement that you've just entered into. We may
Okay.
find it necessary, for properties, as, discretionary action that we do find, necessary to further restrict for purposes of, preservation of the open space.
The most likely thing
Yeah.
is you're gonna have a large subdivision.
Right.
And and
Right.
it's going to have a creek running through it.
Sure,
Or it's gonna have
that's-
environmentally sensitive areas,
That's right.
or it's gonna have
Right.
archaeological
That's
or
right.
cultural resources.
Space.
And you are gonna zone all that.
Right.
Open space to preserve it.
Right,
And
that's the most
prevent
likely,
them-
but that's not the only time that it
No.
could be used.
No, but.
Tim could have, a beautiful 250 acre parcel, up in the wilderness somewhere, and he doesn't want his kids to further, subdivide it and sell it off and further impact. So he's gonna slap this OS zone on it and a conservation easement, and he's gonna protect it from, any future development.
I want to bring up the question of the fact that something's zoned open space does not necessarily mean that it's passive recreation under our park and recreation facilities, because that only involves public agency or nonprofit organization.
Right.
So I've found myself,
But it could be also under this outdoor rec section.
oh yeah, it could
Yeah.
be, if it fits the ownership requirement.
Right.
Yeah, I think the consensus of the commission is that an open space is an area that we want to protect.
That's why we're doing, or somebody wants to
Or
protect
somebody
it.
wants to protect
Or
it,
is, or is required to be
Yes.
protected,
or is required.
Exactly.
but it's open space.
I think it's, we talked about inventories before, and this may be an important place to mention that, because currently, about 10% of the range land is in a conservation easement, which means 90% is not. So if you're looking for places to locate some of those other uses, I think there's a pretty good inventory. 180,000 acres of range, that's a lot. So hopefully we can find places for those energy uses out there.
Yes,
And I know that there have been in other counties, solar agencies have contacted the landowner and asked if they can put a solar farm, out in the pasture and stuff. So I agree with you, Tom. I think that you're gonna start seeing people who are using the land for agriculture, maybe also using it for solar farms or wind farms.
right. I don't think we have to allow it in what is likely to be a relatively
Right.
small amount of land area
Right, area.
dedicated to open space. So are we ready to talk about overlay zones, or do we need to talk about the setbacks?
Let's take a look at this. Guess since there are some buildings in OS, why it makes,
So I think these were just carried over from current code.
except OS is a new zone.
Doesn't look like we,
Carried
vision
over.
clearance. So it looks like we've applied some vision clearance standards.
Oh, yeah, vision clearance.
And unfortunately, that would be rolled into the section of code that we're not looking at, I believe, additional regulations. I don't see, maybe not. Vision clearance.
So
Can somebody help me here? Which of these is the setback from the neighbor's property line or the neighboring structure?
Well, they're all from the property boundary.
yeah,
I mean, the issue that comes up a lot in rural areas is that, oh, whoopee, they say they have to have 100 feet of defensible space, but the houses are only 20 feet apart, or the houses are only 10 feet apart. So you don't really get
Well,
defensible space between structures. So which of these is that?
You can't regulate somebody else's property and you can't force people to be more than 30 feet from the property line under the current building
Right.
and fire safety code.
so if you've got two properties side by side that have, developed 30 feet off the property boundary, then you've got a
60 feet.
60-foot
That's
distance
60 feet.
It should
between,
be 60.
separation between buildings.
Right.
But
And
if it's
100
10 if
feet
it's-
doesn't ask, there is nothing that tells you that you need 100 feet between structures. The
Oh, I
100
know.
feet is just yeah,
If you
you're
have it-
aware of that.
If you
That's the
have it-
problem.
Right, but it's not even intended to provide that. That 100 feet is a different level of clearing than the 30-foot and the 5-foot and there's all those different tiered
If you have,
requirements.
if you have 100 feet on your own property
Yes,
around your house, then that's what you should be
Right.
doing.
right.
But if you have 50 feet, you can, and your neighbor does it right and you do it right,
Yes.
you've done it, you've got 100 feet.
Right.
But if it's 10 feet, you're screwed.
But that's why it's a 30-foot clearance to a building, which theoretically is providing you 60 feet between buildings, but it's not, because we have existing buildings that are built closer to the property line, and we just have to live with that.
Well, and earlier, I mean, this is.
So when it says 20, so the standard here says 20 feet from property line for the front,
For the public service zone.
In the
and then
public
20
service
feet
zone.
from the property line for the street side. Which is and then there's interior
And
side
then
and
you
rear.
have to also consider the street as part of your defensible
I
space.
mean, street side is basically when your side is on a street, this is what you need.
Okay, so which is the one between your neighbor and you?
There is no
Well,
requirement for distances between a neighbor on a separate piece of property.
But if you have neighboring property, you have to be, and you're
So
not on the street.
How far from your
if that-
property line?
10 feet from the property line.
Oh, okay, so you're 10 feet from your property line on your side, they're 10 feet from the property on their side.
That's what
Okay.
it says for public service, but I think that is superseded by the wildfire safety regulations, which have requirements of 30 feet in high fire danger areas. And we used to have a little asterisk everywhere that said that.
Because, I mean, don't we, in residential areas. there's no-
Same practical effect, so sometimes there are some mitigations available, like no windows on that side.
Right.
Made of fire-resistant construction.
So do we have that on page,
It's actually part of the
This-
public resource
Code, right.
No, I'm
code.
talking about, do we have that asterisk anymore in the
I think
rural?
she's writing it in.
Well, yeah, so I think we need to write it back in, because the old code actually referred directly to another section of the building code, which in my understanding no longer applies. Julie,
think-
okay, she's shaking her head.
Well, there's
Yeah, I know, that's why I'm.
basically, there's no problem if we just say I think it's the 4290 and 4291.
Exactly.
Regulations, and I forgot whether, I keep forgetting whether it's Public Resources Code 4290, and then there's another
I
set
think
of
there's
regulations.
two of
Yeah.
them in different
Well, I'll work
government
with
code
her.
Oh.
section and a public resource code section. I think it's all in the public resource code
That's-
section, and it's wildfire safety
Yeah.
Yeah,
regulations.
I mean, we could just say
4290
You
and
have to comply with
4291.
Yeah,
state-
exactly.
We
It's-
have to comply with state, fire, wildland
Safety
fire
regulations.
regulations.
And that actually applies
The
to
wording
every,
somewhere.
Yeah, I know.
But I-
that applies to everything, and the building department would go ahead and,
It only applies.
and review building plans for, some sort of
But
a,
it should be
right?
here because
Yeah.
people look first, anybody who
Sure.
has experience looks first
Right,
to see
right.
what this requirement
but I'm
is.
saying I don't know, a waiver, variance, whatever they're calling it, isn't part of our process. That would be part of the
That's
building
clear.
department's discretion. But yeah, we can go ahead and refer to, and Julie and I will get the right code section. I do believe it's PRC 4290.
And
Yeah.
so and the jurisdictional issue about CAL FIRE versus, we have to work, there's a
Yeah,
lot
there's a
of
whole-
stuff that we have to work out there, but at the end of the day, regardless of who enforces it, we have to comply with fire district standards in their own districts, and then there's also the CAL FIRE state regulations, and those CAL FIRE regulations, the 4290 and 4291 apply, or I hear everybody say, well, it's everywhere in the county. It's probably most places in the county. It's actually not we shouldn't just assume it's every single parcel. We need to have layers that show the very high fire hazard severity zone is
Right.
one
Yes.
place.
And we do.
And then there's another, which is the state responsibility area. There are some parcels, not many, that fit in neither, so.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So we'll go ahead and make the reference, but the call, so to speak, would be through the building department.
But it seems to me the same sort of reference should
Right.
be in development standards for
All those
residential.
other things.
Yes.
Because I mean, in residential, on page 22.
No, you're absolutely right. It applies to all.
Yeah, and I mean, just to
I'm
clarify.
I'm looking-
The 5 foot is given as
Yeah.
the interior side for R1 and R2.
It could be just the additional regulations where it says vision clearance. It could also say wildfire safe regulations or whatever the
Right, right,
exact
right.
term is.
Because if in fact, the development and the property do actually, apply under a variance scenario, then they have to revert back to the zoning setback. So
Exactly. You
they
still have
they
the
can't
zoning
go, it's just not we're gonna erase it and you can do whatever you want kind of a thing. They still have a set of standards through the zoning code that apply to every parcel
Yeah,
at a
and that-
minimum.
That's why it says that the 4290 clearances are the same practical effect, because then there are provisions for mitigations that then are actually administered through our building department to decide whether or not that mitigation is sufficient. And they used to have like 5 things that they told you could count toward it, but none of it is super clear. That's the
Okay.
bottom line, so.
I see now, back on page 17, under the resource zones, under setbacks, you have a reference to measured in feet from the property line unless otherwise stated. Construction must also meet the requirements for defensible space
Okay, perfect.
pursuant to 14 CCR Division 1.5,
Yep.
Chapter 7. blah, blah,
Thank
blah.
you. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and see that applies across
It's
the
not
board.
actually in chapter 7, though.
Yeah.
Those are different
Okay.
requirements that are in chapter
Oh,
7.
okay.
The wildfire clearance, vegetation clearance things are actually in the 4290.
Right, okay.
So let's just keep confusing the issue.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm in favor of that.
Minimum fire regulation.
I think it's just something we'll have to vet at the very end and make sure we.
So are you saying that this section that we've referenced here on page 17 is not the correct?
That actually is the one that
Or is
talks
that
about the
different?
screening of vents and the Class A roofing, and That's what chapter 7.
Okay, so this is
Building code
this is incorrect
It
then.
doesn't mention the clearances, but it's not the primary reference
Okay.
for those. It's
So we need to
taking them
change
from-
that then.
Yes.
Or add to it.
Or add to it. probably
Okay.
keep
Add
that.
to it.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you want to get tangled up in everything else. So the 4291 also addresses the driveway requirements and fire department access, which do belong in planning because it's part of the site issues. But all of those things that are little nitpicky building code things are in
Chapter 7, so it sounds like we don't want the chapter 7 stuff included, reference included?
That's not what I would reference. I
Yeah.
would stick to the things that are the state level requirements for the site development
Okay,
issues.
okay.
But that's just me.
Oh,
It
come
doesn't
on.
hurt anything- It doesn't hurt anything to have both of them
Come on, Tom, more is better? No?
Yes, if we're talking about fire safety, if we're talking
Yeah.
about telling people about fire safety.
I know, but
I would tell them about fire safety everywhere we can.
Yeah, but she's also talking about the actual construction of buildings, which is totally out of our purview completely.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
But
So
it's
why,
not like-
why muddy the water when the building department is already looking at that through their plan check review?
As with anything else, when we're doing a list of other requirements, we want to make sure that we're not saying this is an exhaustive list.
Right.
So is,
I relied on Gina.
She knows everything.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So the consensus is chapter 7's out, PRC 4290, 4291 is in.
I believe.
Where was chapter 7?
Let us double check.
It's, we're on page 17, Julie, under minimum setbacks, down under, on the development standard for resource.
But
Table.
chapter 7?
No, page 17. I think.
But there was a mention.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
It's
it's,
chapter 7. We don't have a county code that's
No,
titled.
chapter.
No, 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 no,
is
no.
part of the building code.
they're talking
building
about,
code.
yeah,
Public
yeah,
resources
that's
code.
the
And
confusion.
it's actually 7A, I believe.
Is this title 24 of the state?
Title 24.
Okay.
Yeah, it's that whole thing. That's why we're just confusing.
Glad I'm not building.
And it's also in the residential code, so that's the other reason to not just reference chapter 7. Anyways, building code, but residential construction can be done
Different.
under the California Residential Code, and it's like section 307 or something
There's an
there.
encyclopedic set of codes that go with the state. building
Yeah,
codes
yeah.
that It's just takes up a whole shelf on my bookshelf.
Yes.
Okay. Are we exhausted?
Yeah, not yet. Let's do overlay zones.
Hey,
But before
Great.
we go to
Let's put on
overlay
our show.
zones,
Oh,
I
good, before we
want
go
to
to
bring
overlay.
up something that I'm not quite sure this is the right time to talk about. I think it might come up later. And this is where we have property that is zoned for duplexes, so R2.
You want me to go back?
And so it's zoned for duplexes, but if it doesn't have public sewer and water, we won't actually allow someone to put a duplex on it. And I just think that's ridiculous with our need for housing. A duplex can easily be served by an on-site wastewater system.
Well,
Yeah.
that's not for, that wasn't written into the zoning code. That's a provision in the general plan. As we read
Are
it.
you sure?
Mhm.
I think it's in the zoning code,
Well,
but maybe
It's-
it has made its way in the general plan. I just think it's something we need to look at because prohibiting duplexes on property that is zoned for it seems pretty short-sighted under our current situation.
With the caveat that the lot's big enough.
Well, that's always the caveat.
I mean,
You
right?
always
In
have to
order- In
design
order to
for
put
it.
the septic system in.
yeah.
Yeah, but you always have to get a permit for the design of your septic system anyway,
Right.
so, and prove that you have water and, So I just don't want to lose that
Well,
thought. It's not that many parcels.
If it's in the general plan, though, we'd have to do it
Yes, I
separately.
know, but we get to do 4 times a year a general plan
right.
amendment, so we might want to.
So,
Okay.
yeah, the public water and sewer is, required for residential, low density, medium density, and high density, development.
where are you reading now?
I'm actually in the general plan, in the land use element.
Thank you.
Thank you. But
Yeah.
obviously, it doesn't apply to single-family homes that are outside of.
So this would be for new development. If you are providing us, if you are asking for a subdivision map,
I'm talking about existing parcels.
yeah, existing parcels. It's my understanding that the existing parcels, legally existing parcels would be, you can still develop on those parcels. If you don't have public sewer, it doesn't condemn the parcel
No,
from being
but it-
developed.
But it can only be developed as a single-family residence, even if it's zoned for duplex. Currently, that is the interpretation from the county, and I've watched it get applied, so I know that that is the case. And it's kind of hidden. I remember it was hard to find where that was. It wasn't immediately obvious when you looked it up. So I'd like to find it and fix it if we can.
I mean, so if it's in the general plan, then we just have to have that at another discussion.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was in the general plan. I think it was buried in our zoning ordinance someplace.
Is this something you can go to the desk at the
Yeah, well,
building
we
department?
can look at it.
I might be able to find it. I mean, it's been a few years since it came up, but I wrote it down as something to
Yeah.
address when we did the zoning code update.
So you think you can find where that requirement is?
I probably got it from Gina.
I relied on Gina.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I didn't
Begin
find
to
it
think,
initially.
Let's see, new parcels, density, individual well, on-site wastewater, 2 dwellings for 5 acres, public water and on-site disposal, 2 dwellings per 1 acre. I think this is what you're referring to then?
One duplex.
One duplex.
Right.
Except it did not, they were not allowed to go forward with their plans to do their duplex.
Because the parcel was less than an acre?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So you're looking in rural residential and rural residential low?
Well, right now, we're actually looking in the current zoning code, under
I'm
site
looking-
development standards for the R2 zone. I thought Michelle was talking about, the density requirements in the general plan, under residential medium density, which refers to, land division and development of, parcels in that designation needing public water and sewer. But I think what you're referring to is probably this restriction for the maximum density allowance in the R2 zone.
Yeah, but look at number
But it
one,
was
look at
only
B1, doesn't
you-
that answer your
they-
question?
You could have had, on the particular parcel, you could have built a duplex if you had public sewer and water, so I think this is it. But you were not allowed to
Right.
if you needed to have on-site wastewater.
Right.
Even though the parcel was large enough to put a duplex on and put a sufficient septic system, they had already designed the septic system. It wasn't a project I designed, it was somebody
I
else's.
think I know what
idea.
project you're
Yeah.
talking about.
So it just seems like.
Which was crazy in the end, because in the workaround, you could have a primary residence and an ADU.
Which is what I recommended they do, and that is what.
It was just a matter of
It
labeling
was
it.
only a matter of like 100 square feet in this particular situation. So it was solvable, but that's not always going to be the case that it is solvable. So why would we have that restriction?
Doesn't it have, to when you go back, well, you're past that.
Oh, sorry, I can go
That
back.
one was like 70,000 square feet, right? You would have, with public water and public sewage,
Right.
2 dwellings per 7,000 square feet. I mean, is that enough to put a well and a septic system in?
No, that's
And
why
then-
they're saying,
and that's why
they're saying a public
So I'm
water.
not sure we-
So the general,
There was enough on their parcel.
On 7,000.
what she's saying is they had they had a septic engineer that came in and designed a system that fit, that was able to accommodate the structure and a septic system on this particular parcel, but they didn't fall into this
They didn't
minimum
have
1
those.
acre, and we said
The
no.
42,000, it didn't have 42,000, so let's say it had 30,000 square feet.
Right.
So they were stuck in that, where they weren't allowed to do it. So I'm just
So-
throwing it out there.
You want me to go back to residential?
Well, I was looking in
Are we-
residential, looking to see if it,
Look at page 1 again.
I'm sorry. You know, I have been collecting things for years.
I know, we're,
Conditional use or something in R2 if it didn't fit the standard and you could ask for an exemption or something? Or is that?
well,
possible?
I mean, it really,
A hardship variance.
hardship variance. You know, I suppose there are those scenarios that might be able to work, but you know, we have to work with the on-site wastewater division of environmental management because they have standards as well.
And they didn't have a problem with it. They were fine.
Well, see, I think if you jump through enough hoops, I don't know if I want to do something unilaterally saying, you know, this is, that you can always do this, but, you know, if this and that, you know, if you cross your,
It's always predicated on your ability to
Right.
get all of the permits.
Right.
So all I'm saying is, if it's zoned R2, maybe we don't have a requirement that it have on-site
So-
water in any case.
We
So long
don't.
as they can meet all the other requirements.
So we don't anymore. So, so these maximum and minimum densities, are mirrored with the general plan. And we do indicate subject to environmental health requirements for sewage disposal and water services. So if everybody says, hey, you know, it's meeting the general plan requirements and the environmental health department says, yeah, okey dokey, everything's okay,
So
then
it's
it looks
solved
like
in
the
our-
problem is solved.
Yeah, so that's it. I was reading here, I didn't see the
Okay.
problem anymore, but I thought it could be hidden from me.
Okay.
You might have done that on purpose.
I would intentionally hide things from you.
So we're.
Is that what you're
this
saying?
under Multi-unit dwelling under R2,
Yeah, I don't see it.
I'm
It
looking at
wasn't
page 23.
explicit. Yes, let's get 23. Multi-unit dwelling, permitted. Well, yeah, there's nothing there that would stop you. It was under this other section, but I didn't see anything but now I'm.
Well, what land use designation would that be under?
Usually it would be residential medium density. All of our
Right.
R2 should be in R,
And that requires public water and public sewer.
right.
And that's the chap, and she's saying that shouldn't always be the case.
But that's for new subdivision. So if we're reviewing a parcel of land for an R2 zoned subdivision, and they don't have public water and public sewage disposal, then we're gonna say, not in this land use designation, doesn't work.
What
So you're distinguishing the way you'd apply the zoning the way you'd apply the general plan based on whether it's existing parcel
Right.
or whether
If
it's a
we
new
have
parcel.
existing non-compliant parcels.
We've got a lot of them.
Right.
Yeah.
All of the parcels up in, all of the, Lakemont Pines and Meadowmont and Big Trees Village and all of those. There's, the majority of those residential subdivisions up the Highway 4 corridor beyond, up in the Avery and beyond, areas, or I should say, yeah, Avery and beyond, Murphy's beyond. A lot of those don't have public sewer. They're on septic
Right.
systems, and they're all zoned R1, and they're all located in a residential low-density land use designation.
Right, but she's talking about medium density now.
Well, medium density is the same thing.
Well, is it now taken care of on page 23? So that you have,
Yes, I think
I
Michelle's
believe, I
satisfied.
don't see anything that now has that restriction on it. That was like the donut,
Yes.
little weird situation.
Right.
and
That we
people
have-
just have to understand when it says permitted, that's subject to all other,
Well, yeah,
Right.
But that's always true, so I
Yeah,
don't see. an
exactly.
issue.
No, I'm not saying we need
Yeah.
to put it in. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hate to spend time on
No,
something.
No, that's
It's
okay.
just such a
Yeah.
niche problem, but.
So it's, what, 2:15? Do we,
I think we
Air
can fly, I think we can fly through this.
you think so?
That's
We're
what
close
I
to the
felt too.
airport.
I was, okay, airport overlay zone, we could.
That we can fly right through that.
I would recommend that we stop here and.
What? Are we wearing you out?
Yes, unfortunately.
So, so,
Well, a lot of this shouldn't be too difficult if you want to try, at least get to the plan development. I'm looking at a lot of this and it's mostly, it's just carried forward. So, if we want to have a discussion, the airport overflight overlay, we have 2 overlay zones currently in, that regulate land use in the airport area of influence. And one of them is the, airport overflight, zone, and the other one is height limitation. And so basically, it didn't make any sense, to have 2 different overlays, restricting the same area and basically referring to the same plan, which is the airport, what are we calling the thing? The something's,
yeah.
whatever the airport plan is called. Yeah. So we have an established plan that regulates land use around the airport. And it says, you can do these, you can do that, you got height limitations, it talks about, a variety of regulations. And so, what we did was we just proposed to eliminate the HL height limitation. We took those standards, rolled them into the AO and called it good. So, the proposal is to rezone all the parcels that have the HL combining zone to simply reflect the AO
And
combining
how many
zone.
parcels are around that? We just had that, I mean, there
I will
weren't that-
show you.
There weren't that many, were there?
Well, actually, there's more than you think.
Because they go,
Yeah.
because it ends up across the street or something?
Yeah.
Right.
So here's the airport.
Right.
All of these properties are affected with the HL and the AO.
And
Here's
How many
how,
is that a lot, but most of those are just vacant,
They're-
vacant
most of them are ranch land.
ranch, right? Yeah.
There are some smaller residential parcels that might be like 5 acres or something, but the majority of this is ranch land.
And the parcels that are residential have like single-story houses on them. There's
No,
nothing,
there
they're
isn't.
off
Right.
the side of
Yeah.
them.
And all the parcels currently have both overlays in
You're just gonna
the same identical pattern.
Yes.
So there is no parcel that has just the AO overlay.
No, because the AO actually, refers back to the airport plan, and the airport plan regulates the height.
Yeah,
So
Makes a lot of sense
We're
what you're
just
saying.
simplifying.
we're simplifying it. That's all we're doing.
And most of this is a requirement, so I mean,
Yeah.
Exactly, I don't
So-
think we get to
Yeah, what do
say.
We're not changing the airport plan.
right.
And I think
We're-
that's required by state law.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In federal, maybe even federal law.
That's why I thought we could fly through this section.
Well,
I think
I-
it's just
You know,
Well, I
if
thought,
we-
I thought I found,
If we are going
type-
to, if we're going to go through this the same way we've gone meticulously through the industrial and all the other zones, I think it would take a fresh look. I don't want us to just fly through it. I want us to really look at each and every ward
So
and
did
see
you-
whether or
did you-
not we
what-
need to make changes.
I have a public comment. I think these are very common sense use restrictions. No use that would create light and glare that would, affect the pilot. Confusing lights that would affect the pilot, impair visibility of the pilot. And I'm going to go back to my previous question. And if you look at the number of parcels, it covers a lot of parcels. I'm wondering what we do where there are private landing strips proposed. We're not going to do this, as I was told before. So what do we do to ensure the safety of those private landing strips? Because they do it, well, when we try to protect safety, as you can see, we do affect the surrounding land uses.
that's why I think we have it subject to a conditional use permit. So we put the onus on the person that's going to have the airstrip rather than the onus on the surrounding property. And if it's an
Well-
airstrip in the middle of a huge piece of property, shouldn't be a problem considering what type of aircraft he or she's flying.
Unless Elon buys something here.
I mean, Gina, how big is that, how big is that red square?
Which red square?
I mean, if you squared all of those red,
Oh,
What's this?
I have no idea.
it's huge. I mean, that's my point, I guess, is whenever you put an airstrip in, you're going to affect, the safety of the airstrip is going to be affected by the neighboring properties. So a use permit's not going to cover it.
Well, why not?
Well, it's,
It would have to, look at the size
they're
of that.
private airstrips,
Oh,
they're
he's-
not public.
He's saying they wouldn't get noticed because they're not in the 300 foot.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the land use on neighboring properties is going to get restricted.
No, that's what we're saying is you don't restrict
The
the,
restrictions,
the restriction is all on the landing strip. The landing strip may
Right.
not be allowed.
To show that they're not restricting uses or otherwise providing a
can't
safety
Oh, wow.
issue for adjacent properties.
Cool.
yeah,
That's what and you're serious about that?
yes.
Yeah, that's how it
That's what
works.
the use
You're
permit
not
process
allowed
is
to
for.
impact your neighbor's ability to develop
Okay.
their property with
Right.
anything you do
Well,
on yours.
That's fine with me.
Good.
I haven't seen that level of restriction on private landing strips before.
Do we have?
I've seen the argument, what I've seen before are the arguments between the surrounding neighbors and the guy who wants the landing strip. So,
I know of one in Railroad Flat. How many more can there?
There-
well, I mean, I'm assuming they're gonna be proposed in the future.
Well, yeah, it definitely could
I-
be proposed
I
in
mean,
the future.
I certainly feel comfortable with what we've said, and
Me
I
too.
assume that's what the planning director would also
Okay, cool.
say.
I think, Tom, you're right, that certainly some use that a neighbor has could impact your ability to enjoy your land. You know, if they have pigs and you don't like their pigs rooting around close to your boundary or whatever. But those are things that you already knew were allowed in the surrounding properties, so that's a little different than building a private airstrip, so that person would have to come, get a conditional use permit to build the private airstrip, and it might just not be possible for them to do it. I mean, they can't restrict the height of their neighbors' buildings beyond what the zoning code restricts them to.
Do they need, I'm assuming there must be some sort of FAA approval for private landing strips, so I'm assuming.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
whether it's
Yeah.
feasible would be.
Right.
Yes.
Also weighed in on by the
Right.
FAA,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I've known
That's-
people
yeah,
with
that's-
private landing strips.
So I have a very weighty question if we're done with that one. On 17.06.090 on page 49, I thought I found a typo, but it's repeated. So
Navigation.
Navigation easement,
Okay, I'm sorry.
I saw that too.
I'm getting a little rummy. What page did you say?
17.06.
49.
on page 49, the second
49.
Navigation, yeah.
second section down.
I was gonna have to look up what navigation was.
Aviation navigation.
That's what I figured,
Yeah.
but
Is it- I
just
mean,
from the
so it's-
context.
Is that,
How many of us looked at that?
but twice, you know, and it becomes
When we-
Well, there was at least 4 of us that
I
looked at
did
that and
cross-
didn't catch
I did
it.
There's
cross that
3
over
places of it
when we
where it
did
is.
a project at the existing.
oh, you're right.
Yeah,
She'll
The
do a
next-
search.
The next section too is
I'm gonna look
navigation.
it up.
Okay.
Is it a real word or?
yeah, it is.
Navigation?
Is it?
It is.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
I think it's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I just want
It
to,
could be,
When-
it's a synonym for aviation apparently,
Oh,
but most people probably know aviation.
Yeah, and navigation, so.
Unless,
Okay.
unless the
Okay.
airport land use plan requires us to say navigation.
Navigation, the navigation of aircraft.
oh, see, we learned something today.
See?
So, you paused.
What is a navigation easement?
Yeah, I see that too. You're on Google.
It's,
It's a real word.
it's identified on a map that the FAA provides that shows what the impact of being within a particular zone would be, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Are we keeping navigation?
So,
Why not? Or we could put navigation in parentheses,
and we're proud of it.
aviation navigation,
that might be good.
just so people don't think, look, how many people reviewed this and they didn't catch
That's right.
it.
I'm going to be hearing from Kelly.
Yes, Kelly, be contact us in our dreams, right? Should we, because we are so successful with that, I'm thinking we should look at the one-page environmental protection
Yes.
EC overlay zone.
Let's do that.
I will have many comments on that section.
Thank you first.
Warning.
But does Tim have any?
No, waiting for Joe.
What page would that be?
50.
50. Oh, I can get back there.
Well, I can start. 1707020A, all use, development, and disturbance of land within the EP overlay zone shall be designed and sited to avoid disruption or degradation of the resource identified for environmental protection. And I'm wondering how that is reflected in the overlay. Are properties like tagged, rural residential red-legged frog, or how do we identify the particular environment, the particular use?
Yes.
Particular thing you're protecting?
I don't think we have to. I think it's telling these people they have to go do that.
So usually it's identified through a biological resource assessment, wetland delineation, and it's noted within that plan that there is habitat or resources that need to be protected for whatever reason. It's identified and delineated, so by the time we get to this, we've got a really well-defined area of what and where.
But I think, if you just
What-
read this, and I think Joe has a good concern, that you don't, the purpose of the overlay zone is to designate environmentally sensitive areas. I think some statement of how that happens.
Why did it get the overlay on it in the
How
first place?
do we go about designating the environmentally sensitive areas?
Well, it's through a discretionary action.
Yeah, but I mean, some,
Like through a biological study.
Right.
I mean, I think that's what Tim is.
that's what I'm saying. is-
Oh, you want to word it that way?
Yeah, I think,
Well, something about giving examples, because otherwise you go into this as if it's already been designated.
Oh,
Right,
And-
that's what I was saying.
yeah.
So we wouldn't be putting this on something unless
Okay.
it was like a subdivision, so it had already been studied.
right,
Right.
And then you're applying this to the new parcels created
Right.
as part of that
So-
action.
Yeah,
Right.
based on a biological study.
yeah, this would be identified through a discretionary
Well,
application.
It says potential flooding, so
That
maybe
is one.
under purpose statement, we just say as identified by,
Yes,
as identified by professional studies,
sure, professional, but sure.
just trying to make it easy.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because we have a lot of those studies already.
Right.
In fact, under the 96 plan, we identified critical deer winter range, we identified eagle habitat. We had maps that identified the critical habitat for tiger salamander, red-legged frog. So we're not putting those into an overlay at this point. We're just applying this overlay zone when there's a discretionary project.
Correct.
Okay.
So we should say as identified through professional studies required for discretionary projects. Right? To make it clear? Sorry to take over. but I'm
Yeah,
just
no,
trying to-
that's fine. That makes sense. I think the only would be if we already know. There are gonna be some that this overlay will already be on there as soon as we complete this project, right? The zoning, because there are parcels that we already know. Because they already have.
Oh, they're already
applied for this-
zoned,
Yes, they're already.
and they're already zoned that way because of a discretionary.
Exactly.
Right, right.
But
Application.
But it also could happen in the future when
Sure.
they apply for a discretionary permit. I'm just saying, there's some discretionary permits already out there.
Now, I think it's also worthwhile for the commission to know that this would be a new section of the code because the existing 1707-010 doesn't currently exist in our code. So these would be new code sections where all the overlay zones are kind of lumped together, right?
No. No, this is
Okay.
existing.
Is what,
Okay. So,
The
17
EP overlay exists, AO already exists, DR already exists.
The numbering section.
Oh, the numbering's all wrong. It's all gonna be different.
Yeah.
But there's an
That's
EP
what I meant.
overlay zone already, and we
Yeah,
already have
right.
parcels that have an EP
Right.
overlay. And we will have new parcels in the future that will,
Right,
not new parcels necessarily, but that will receive the EP overlay as
Sure.
a result of something
Something
that they
that-
are requesting.
Right, something that happens in the future.
Right.
right.
and maybe,
Yeah.
maybe the place to cite professional studies is in the second sentence.
That's what I was saying.
The EP overlay zone is intended for areas subjected to potential flooding, blah, 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 or sensitive environmental
Right.
habitats
As identified by
Identified
professional,
by professional
Through
study.
professional studies
required
for
by discretionary projects.
Well,
Got it.
At least I came to it.
Yeah.
A little late,
Yeah,
maybe.
but I think that doesn't necessarily say it has to be past, future. That could
I don't think it
envelop
matters.
both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but is it a discretionary project or is it a discretionary action?
Probably action to be
Action.
less CEQA-ish here.
Okay, but what if
But-
there is an individual that just wants to place an EP overlay on their property?
Why would you want?
It doesn't have to be a discretionary action. I mean, that's generally where it comes from, but I mean,
But-
Tim could choose to place an EP combining zone on his property
You could
for
request that.
Sure,
identification.
but then it limits what he can do on that.
Well,
piece
sure,
of
but maybe he
property.
wants to do that.
Maybe I'm protecting,
You're just
He's
protecting
protecting natural resources.
from other kids.
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I'm just-
Greedy kids messing up his natural resources.
It's highly unlikely.
Yeah, but
It is.
Wouldn't you have to have something like the, a biological reason to do that. You just
Sure.
can't say it.
Well, I mean,
right?
it's been applied
Yeah.
to conservation easements, and,
Right.
you know, conservation easements are not something that we necessarily are involved in the creation of. You know, that's another, through another entity, and for a variety of reasons. But, you know, if Tim enters into a conservation easement for the preservation of his land, then he could choose to put an EP overlay on his property for future,
Because he did
So
the
what-
studies
what if-
and he
so what
knows
if-
about him, he wants it documented.
right,
for
he
the
wants it
future.
documented, and this is the way to document
I'm
it.
on the dark side, and I pay somebody that has PhD after their name,
That's it.
that says, this is environmentally, and so the quarter acres or quarter mile around you. You've got red-legged Martian frogs.
Yeah,
And we don't want to say, oh, okay, then we'll have an EP overlay area. You know, there has to be some study of the study.
Right,
This
right.
professional study. So
So,
what
yes,
are-
and you can't apply it to your neighbor.
well,
As identified through professional studies obtained for discretionary actions vetted by the county?
vetted by the county?
well,
I
we
think-
don't,
I think-
Instead of
we don't
required-
normally vet conservation easements, though. I mean,
I think you were fine originally. I think
Okay.
we are getting more and more
Yeah.
far-fetched.
I'm not trying to be humorous. It's, if somebody wanted to use this as a sword rather than a shield.
But you don't get to go do a study on someone else's property and try to use it.
Well, somebody might try.
I don't think that we.
well, no, because, I mean, in order to zone your property, we have to have property
We wouldn't
owners
let that happen.
authorization.
Just trying to put in here
And
You-
processed by county
something like that.
a department or something. It'd have to be planning department, right? It's the only department
Or
that's gonna do it.
adopted.
Yeah.
It could theoretically be another department.
I kind of like just the way it is.
Yeah.
As adopted by?
So processed through a county land use department?
There you go.
That.
I kind of like just the way it is.
But I mean, process.
I don't
just
think
means
we need to add anything
like
to it.
Recycling processing.
No, that she's talking about the discretionary
How about-
action taken by the county.
That sounds good.
Okay, so do we want required for discretionary actions or obtained for discretionary actions?
Aren't we really interested that the discretionary action has indeed occurred? I mean, that the county
That
has
was why
acted,
and processed
upon-
or adopted.
adopted.
I mean, we need to say that it's not just that somebody threw it out there and we looked at it and went, what are
Yeah.
you talking about?
Yeah, exactly. That's the process.
That doesn't put the EP on there.
Right,
So-
right.
So we could get rid of that required or obtained entirely and just say as identified through professional studies for discretionary actions processed through the county. And we just get
Well-
rid of required or obtained and obtained. We just-
I'd say,
Yeah.
yeah, required
Okay.
or adopted instead of just.
Resulting in the overlay. I mean, that's the basic.
So how do you want it to read?
That would be kind of,
Circular.
I am because I am.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I am.
Something that would indicate that the county has acted to recognize.
I think,
How about recognized by a county agency?
So what about just as identified through professional studies for discretionary actions processed through a county land use department?
See, process.
It's process is the
Doesn't mean
problem.
that there was an outcome recognizing that it was good.
and acted upon
Just
by a county
Discretionary-
land use.
Discretionary actions acted upon?
No,
I
it's
think-
weird.
It's an active.
How about just the study itself is recognized by a county or state agency?
Well, yeah. I
Just
feel like
that's-
we're getting
Well,
lost.
that's why I think
no-
let's just leave it alone.
Well, I think there's potential for attempted abuse. And that's-
It hasn't been abused yet. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
How about routed through?
Well, now that's your process to get.
Oh,
It's recognized. That indicates that the,
Well, the county has to actually place this overlay on,
Yes.
so.
it does,
so
it's,
back to vetted.
I don't think, I mean, I think it would have to have come through a county department, and that county department would have had to require the overlay zone to be placed on that piece of property, right?
well, it's, these studies could be for, just a CEQA review of whether, property can be developed.
Well, but that's why we're saying, so it has to be something that then is acted upon by the county.
How about this, as
Modify
identified,
the map.
it's identified through professional studies supporting a county land use determination.
There you
Yes.
go.
Oh,
Okay.
now we can go home.
That's why we have you here. We should probably quit though.
What is that, chapter 17?
Land use
I
determination?
think we can do one.
Supporting a county land use yeah, you're right, determination.
Yes, I like it.
Yes.
It's perfect. Until
It'll
we look at it
be
next
our-
week.
It'll be the first subject of an appeal.
So let's look at 17.08, which has exactly
Well,
3 sentences.
I'm not finished yet. On this section, I have one. This is a yes or no question, though.
Okay.
In the required findings, it says, there will be no significant environmental effect on the resources identified for protection, and the proposed use, development, or disturbance will be consistent with the protection and continuance of the resource. Okay? Does that mean that there will be no significant environmental effect that's project related, or that there will be no significant environmental effect that is cumulative, or both?
Both. I would say
It's on
both.
the, I mean, if it's in the overlay, why then
We
we
looked
look at it and say, well, the overlay is mainly concerned about whatever, frogs.
Well,
And this particular project is, well, the overlay may be considered.
As a
about many.
result of the project, of the proposed project, says, once you have this on here, now it's protecting the
Right.
property. Somebody
In
comes in and
perpetuity.
says, I do want to put a warming hut up
Right.
on my property. And so I think we would have to determine that
You know, I'm just noticing it's a little strange to say there will be no significant effect and then be adequate mitigations. Is that an and or an or? Are we going to allow development as long as we can approve a mitigated neg deck? Is that what we're saying here?
Or you can buy, if you have a wetland, you can buy land someplace else, and all of a sudden, because you've mitigated the fact that,
potentially,
that,
right?
yeah,
Well, I
You
mean,
think that's-
really what we want to do, isn't it, that if you have adequate mitigation measures so that there will be no significant effect, you know, that otherwise there would be.
But what Commissioner Chimenti is saying is true, that mitigation is not necessarily on-site mitigation for purposes of approving
Right.
neg deck. So it's a question of what you guys want to allow in terms of when would it be okay to disturb a site within this overlay zone? What kind of when we say no significant effect, do we mean a mitigated significant effect? Because that's in there under B, or do we mean literally no, a finding of no impact?
I think if you have the ability to mitigate it and you choose to do that, you should be allowed to do that.
Even though it affects this overlay zone.
Even though because it's allowable now to do.
Right, what do we say now about this overlay zone?
This is carried forward.
Yeah. So This is our,
This is the way it is.
How
I
is it
believe-
applied now?
How is it applied?
Yeah, so in other words, when somebody has proposed development in this overlay zone, have you processed mitigated neg decks to allow it?
Not in a very long time, but yes.
Okay.
so I.
Now, my question
And
was
it's-
different. My question was different. If there's a significant unmitigable effect, there's two kinds of significant unmitigable impacts, right? There's ones that are just related to the project, and then there are ones that are cumulative. Right?
But Tom, it's saying, if you look at the existing language, where, I don't see anything that would allow it to be significant and unavoidable. You're saying significant but non-mitigatable, and the existing language wouldn't allow
Exactly.
that.
That's what my question was. That's what my question was. And that's answered. Thank you.
Yeah, that.
I wasn't clear. I wasn't clear if a project had insignificant impacts on the project, but significant cumulative impacts, would that be allowed or not? And you basically said that wouldn't be allowed.
Well, I'm looking at what I think the language means. I'm not the planning
Oh,
commission, and they would decide what they want it to say now.
Based on what
I would like to know what it means now.
based on my reading of it and looking at the page as a whole and looking at B, I would say the intention is not to allow unmitigatable effects on this parcel.
But I don't think we should interpret what our current statute means for Mr. Infosino or anybody else.
Oh, no. But
I think we should talk about what you want to look, what you want it to look like.
Yeah, so.
In the
but
future.
My reading
Yeah.
is that the intention was not to allow a significant effect on that resource on this parcel
If it couldn't be mitigated.
that could not be mitigated
Mitigated.
on this
This parcel.
parcel.
Okay.
So it could have cumulatively significant effects and it would still be allowed.
It doesn't, I don't see how you're getting, so let's say we have. new
I thought she just said this parcel. My understanding of what, Michelle, when you said on this parcel, did
Yeah.
you mean significant cumulative impacts would be allowed?
Bless you.
Significant unmitigatable effects on this parcel? No.
No. Cumulative effects for the resource is my question.
You know, when you're saying cumulative, do you mean in this whole overlay area? Because something that's
No.
going on in this
Okay,
parcel?
let's back up. Let's back up.
Please.
What we often see is you do an environmental impact. Your project has a small effect. But because there's 40 of those projects across the county, they have a significant cumulative impact, right? If the idea is that we're putting these overlay zones in to protect the resource, not just the species on the site, it would suggest that in the future, we would like a code section that would say, we're not allowing significant cumulative impacts in the overlay area.
Okay, in the overlay area, not throughout the county.
No,
I would actually think we should, I wouldn't recommend making a decision about
I
this
think we
right
need to
now.
think about it. It's late in the
Okay.
day and we need to all reread it and think about it,
okay,
what our intention is.
I think that's good.
Because I think we'll all go home after we say something and go,
Yeah.
did I just say?
So do we,
I think it's pretty clear though, by the way it's written.
Well, I feel like I understand what they're trying to get to, but I think if anybody could, if it's not clear to everybody, then maybe we need to tweak the
Well, I think
wording.
it's, I think part of what's happening here is the term "the resource"
Yes.
has some vagueness associated with it. And we're assuming that when we have a biological or cultural or whatever, a biological study, a flooding study, that there will identify a specific
Single-
resource. And the question is, if you have this overlay, do you want it to be tied to, how much and to what extent do you want it tied to the studies that are resulting in the recommendation for the overlay in the first place? Or are we essentially requiring a broader scope environmental analysis that requires additional protections that come with the zone? I mean, the CEQA document for for whatever project it is will take care of some of those project-specific impacts. And then the question is, do you want, how much additional protection do you want once there is some sort of resource identified? Is it going to be literally no environmental impacts at all, even if it's unrelated to the resource identified, or are we gonna be
It
tying
says
it?
only to the resource identity.
Yeah, but
But I think looking at it before next Wednesday is a good idea, because we
Yeah.
really have to look at the development within the EPA overzone, the section before, to see just what are we talking about? Are we
I also
talking
think
about-
we would need to look at if we're, let's say it's a larger project with multiple parcels, but the application is now, and all of those got the EP overlay on them, or many of them. But the project we're looking at is a small project specific to one parcel, then are we looking at the impact to that resource on all these parcels that were identified at once, or just on this parcel?
And I mean, I think I suspect that if we're doing this because there's an identified resource, I suspect that we would want it to be that if you would want there to look beyond the individual parcel
Yeah.
boundaries, right?
So, but it could be a portion of that parcel.
Right,
It
well,
doesn't-
right.
It doesn't necessarily have to
No,
be,
yeah, it says it could be the mapped area.
Right.
It's
Right.
delineated.
right,
yeah.
it's delineated.
So, yeah, I agree. I just think
But
we
if
need
we're
to
also-
come back when we're not tired.
Yeah, and I think it might refresh our minds a bit if we think of it for flood control as well as
Yeah,
Sure.
damage to
Absolutely.
biological damage, to make it make sense.
Okay, are we gonna leave off there then?
I think you do better.
Good place to stop.
Does any commissioner have a report they would like to share? Does our planning director have a report he would like to share?
He wanted to go
Can
over
share.
it.
Even my fingers are not working properly. No, I thought I did, but I may have mentioned it already. So, oh, no, yes, I do. We approved an STVR AUP for 4220 Tomahawk Trail in Copperopolis. That's around the Tarlock Lake. So that will be posted on the website. It is a short-term vacation rental. This one had some comments by some members of the community of that area who were not very happy with that the county keeps approving these things, and I have to remind them that, that's the way it's currently in our ordinance. So I don't know what's going to happen, whether it's going to get appealed or not, but the decision was rendered on September 29, I think. And I think if there was going to be an appeal, 15 days would have almost passed by now. You have a calendar?
When was the day?
September 29, we got 15 days, so 29 and 15 is 44. So the 14th, when is the 14th?
2 days from now.
2 days from now. So there we go. 13, tomorrow or Thursday, tomorrow or whenever the date follows tomorrow.
Saturday, but probably allows them to Monday.
To the Monday, yeah,
So.
yeah. So if that happens, that would be the first STVR appeal in a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the report.
And you're going to make it clear to the agricultural commissioner and anybody else in the agricultural community that's concerned, make it clear to them that they can see any documents that we've gone through
Absolutely.
publicly.
And I think Julie has called the commission.
I texted Jessie and just let her know that it'll be posted, but it would be probably good to get, it sounds like people might be operating under the assumption that what was posted as the consultant's recommended draft is actually what the planning commission may
Right.
be recommending. And so to the extent that is not the case, you might want to you might want to just let the board of supervisors know when you posted the greenhouse gas as well, and CEO as well as Jesse, who will,
Yeah.
I'm sure, follow up with the rest of the ag
Right.
community.
Right.
And let them know that it's a recurring item on our
Our
agenda at this
agenda,
point, so
yeah.
they can always come.
Yeah.
Anytime
Yeah.
this can be.
I suspect that at least Jesse will, and possibly some other in tow, just to
Yeah.
get clarification on that.
And until approved, neither the consultant's recommendation nor the planning commission recommendation is approved until actually approved officially.
Right.
Because we haven't gone through the official,
Well, wait a minute, it was approved by the Board of
by the Board of
Supervisors.
Supervisors, yes. Yeah.
We've done what we're going to do.
Oh,
as far as
absolutely.
the-
Although we.
Done an
it's
incredible
possible that
job.
We would take to the joint meeting
Mhm.
in response to
Yeah.
something they tell us.
Yeah.
Sure.
That recommendation to make a change.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely, we don't want them to think we're saying it's too late for us to be trained.
So I guess
We're just learning something.
there's a question about, are we gonna be having the joint supervisor meeting without having any, we don't have any information from the
Right.
consultants on whether the changes we made will still fit within
But that-
our SP 32 goal.
That's okay, because I think we've made in our statement to the Board of Supervisors, we made it clear what issues are currently existing between the consultants and the commission. And if we have this meeting and the Board of Supervisors agrees with us, it might help us in our dealings with the commissioner, with the consultant.
Consultants. Yeah.
So I don't think it's desirable to put off our meeting, waiting for the consultants to give their thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah.
I think we want to continue and get some support.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is all going to lead into a plan. And that plan would identify whatever it is that we all agreed upon between the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors goes into the plan itself. So these are just the measures. And the plan would include not only the measures, modified measures, and maybe additional measures we haven't even thought about, and the accompanying calculations for carbon dioxide reduction.
Now, the Board of Supervisors might say, well, you get a reading from the consultants as to whether or not this would satisfy the
Yeah.
the goal. But
Yeah.
if they want to do that, that's fine. But I
Yeah,
think,
you know,
I think
that-
it's a good place to have, a good stage of the proceedings to have that meeting.
Absolutely. I mean, what they keep repeating to me is as long as we do not alter any of the numbers, the percentages and so on and so forth. As far as how we rearranging some of those things and using different words, how that affects the potency of the numbers they've given us, they haven't explicitly said that. They have some kind of hinted that sometimes even a change in language could mean something significant. Now, how significant, we don't know.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
Because
if we accepted everything they said verbatim, why, the
Yeah.
numbers would stay the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was your plan in terms of getting the feedback from the consultant?
Well, I was expecting to have gotten feedback from them by now.
Yeah, they
Because
may
when
be waiting.
when I sent it to them, I was of the opinion that, they were gonna look at this and come back with something. So, I'll reach out again and see who's waiting for whom.
Just,
But we're proceeding to get a date on the
Oh,
calendar.
yes, oh, yes,
and have
oh,
a
yes, oh,
deadline
yes.
for-
We'll get a date with Board of Supervisors and move forward.
So everybody should plan on having a lovely
And
weekend.
you're continuing these.
And yeah, so let's
Various
take
things.
I need a motion to continue this meeting to Wednesday, the
Oh.
18th.
Right,
Yeah.
so, before we do that, do we want to start at 9 AM? Or do we want to start at 1 with the possibility that Julie may or may not be present?
Unfortunately, it looks like I have to at least, we might settle, but I have to go to this hearing thus far, and I don't know where I'm gonna come up on the agenda, so it's up to you.
So
You
we
can
have
continue.
reserved the room from 9 o'clock on. So if we want to come back in and meet at 9 AM, we can do so. I originally had reserved it not until 1 o'clock with the understanding that there was AAB and Julie was going to be tied up, but it's not going to be located here. It's going to be located in another area of the county. In addition, we're just not sure whether Julie's going to make it or not,
It's
so.
not going to be located here.
I have an
Appeals board.
assessment appeal hearing that I have to work
Yeah.
with, help assist the assessor with. And even though it is subtle, it's still got complexities, and then
Right.
unfortunately, there's some other things on the agenda that are complicating how soon my item might come up.
And normally, those are done in this chamber, but this particular meeting is not.
There's a
And
meeting
so
in
when,
the sheriff's office.
so when I initially went to reserve this room, I couldn't reserve it until 1 o'clock. And then knowing that it's actually going to be located somewhere else, and then it's iffy whether or not Julie's even going to be here, we have the option of coming in and meeting at 9 AM.
And Julie, do you think it's pretty sure that you would be here at
But
1?
I would like to say yes, but this, unfortunately, the agenda, I would like to say yes. What's happening on the agenda is crazy enough that I can't make that promise, but I can try it.
Yeah.
You're optimistic.
I don't have a lot of, there's some revenue and taxation code, as you probably know, that actually apply to who goes first and on these property tax appeals.
Yeah.
And so I have to wait for the other people, that part of the agenda to complete
Mm-hmm.
before our item comes up. I don't think my item will take long, but
Yeah,
I do,
I understand.
I would like to
But
believe that
there's
we'll
a
be
good
done.
chance.
There's a good chance I'll
But
be.
we do have Martha on Wednesday.
We do.
So she will be participating in Wednesday's meeting.
And do we know Martha's schedule in the future? I mean,
Likely not on Thursdays at all, so far. And it depends on budget. You know, we've got a contract and we're trying to work around what's left in the budget kind of thing. We don't want to use it all up now, knowing that there's going to be, some
Right.
significant work in the end, so.
my inclination is to come back on 1 o'clock, because I value our legal counsel's counsel.
Thank you.
I agree, and I also think we've made pretty good progress, and I think that
gonna be
also will
faster.
give us we'll probably then be mostly getting through what's left in this first section,
Okay.
and that will give us a little more time if you get this next section out.
Yeah.
If we have the opportunity to start on it, great, we'll at least have had a look at it. But if we don't, we'll have a whole nother, we'll have until, a whole nother week.
Wednesday.
Yeah, so,
And, okay, well, as we move to continue the
Yes.
meeting concerning the zoning code to next Wednesday at 1 o'clock.
18th at
The
1 o'clock.
18th at 1 o'clock.
That'll be a special meeting.
Yes,
Yeah,
A continuation of our
continuation.
current special meeting.
okay.
Get all the
Do we have
words
a
right.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now, I would like to move, we continue the consideration of the greenhouse gas, the final contributions to the Board of Supervisors to, what, I guess it'd be two weeks.
2 weeks from today.
And if we need it, but if we get that meeting in the interim, why, that's great.
I'm sorry, so you're asking to move
I
The
move-
greenhouse gas item.
Just
No, I
continue
thought
it.
we have it as a standing
A
item
standing
on
item.
our agenda.
Oh,
so we
okay,
don't
so
On the
have to do
regular
that.
agendas.
Yes, on a
Okay,
regular
Standing,
agenda.
we don't need to do that, that's
Yes.
great. Marvelous.
So now, I would like to adjourn this meeting.
I accept that.
Thank you, everybody, for a lovely.
And thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.